The crystal flute felt heavy in my hand, catching the fracture of light from the gallery chandeliers. I watched my father, Julian, slip a small dissolvable tablet into the champagne. He didn't tremble, he didn't hesitate. He stirred it with a cocktail straw, wiped the rim, and turned to me with the smile of a man closing $1 million deal. "For you, Ilara," he said. I took the glass. I didn't drink. Instead, I turned to my golden child sister, tapped her shoulder, and handed her my death sentence. "Here, Serafina, you're the star tonight. You take the full pour." To understand why I handed my own sister a poisoned glass of vintage Dom Perignon, and why I stood there and watched her drink it, we have to go back to the beginning. My name is Ilara. I'm 24 years old, and I work in the basement of the art world literally. I'm a restoration specialist. I fix the cracks in other people's masterpieces. I learned to be invisible because, in the Vancroft family, there was only room for one muse, and that role was cast before I was even born. My sister, Serafina, was the art. I was just the packaging. Our childhood was a gallery exhibition that never ended. The walls of our Manhattan penthouse were shrines to Serafina's genius, her finger paintings framed in gold, her mediocre sketches praised by critics on my father's payroll. I was the logistical error. When I scored perfect marks on my art history finals, my mother, Eleanor, asked if I could proofread Seraphine's artist statement. When I got into a prestigious restoration program in Florence, my father asked if I could use my time there to scout venues for Serafina's European tour. I wasn't a daughter. I was staff. I accepted it. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, safe enough, I could survive them. I built a life in the shadows, analyzing pigment and canvas weave, finding comfort in things that could be proven true or false. Unlike my family, chemistry doesn't lie. But silence, I learned, isn't a shield, it's a target. The night of the gala changed everything. It was the unveiling of Seraphine's blue period. The gallery was packed with investors and critics. I had escaped to the climate-controlled storage room to check the humidity levels, my actual job, when the heavy steel door clicked open. I froze behind a stack of crates. It was Julian and Eleanor. "The trust executes next Tuesday," Julian hissed, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Once she turns 25, she gets the voting shares. She demand an audit, Eleanor. She see the provenance records. She know the Rembrandts are fake. She won't know if she's unfit," my mother replied. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "A medical episode, something psychological, or accidental. If she's institutionalized or incapacitated. The power of attorney reverts to us. The sedative is untraceable in small doses," Julian said. "Just enough to cause a breakdown at the party. We frame it as stress. We commit her for observation. By the time she's lucid, the audit deadline will have passed." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just bad parents, they were criminals. And I was the loose end. I waited until they left, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my humidity gauge. I walked back out into the party, the noise of the crowd washing over me like static. I saw Julian at the bar. I saw him prepare the glass. He walked over to me, beaming, playing the doting father for the cameras. He handed me the glass. "To your future," he said. I looked at him. I looked at the liquid fizzing slightly more than usual. And then I saw Serafina. She was laughing, basking in the attention, completely unaware that her genius was funded by fraud and her parents were monsters. I didn't plan it. It was instinct, survival. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, turning to Serafina, "the artist should have the first toast." I handed her the glass. She smiled, that dazzling, oblivious smile. "Thanks, Ilara, you're the best." She tilted her head back. She swallowed. And I stood there, watching the clockwork of my family finally, violently, break apart. The sound of the baccarat crystal hitting the marble floor wasn't a tinker, it was a gunshot. The gallery went silent. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. For a second, no one moved. They just stared at the spray of champagne and broken glass glistening under the spotlights, assuming it was a clumsy accident, a party foul. Then Seraphine's knees buckled. She didn't fall gracefully. Like the tragic heroines in the painting she claimed to emulate, she crumbled. Her legs turned to water and she hit the ground with a sickening thud, her head bouncing once against the cold stone. "Serafina!" The scream came from my mother, Eleanor. It was perfect pitch modulated, loud enough to show devastation but controlled enough not to sound ugly. She rushed forward, her silk gown sweeping through the puddle of spilled champagne. My father, Julian, froze. He didn't look at Serafina. He looked at the empty glass on the floor. Then he looked at the glass still in my hand, the one I hadn't drunk. His eyes met mine, and in that split second, the mask slipped. There was no concern for his dying favorite daughter. There was only the terrifying cold realization of a predator who had just stepped into his own trap. He knows, I thought, taking a sip of my safe, unadulterated water. He knows I switched them. I set my glass down and knelt beside my sister. Serafina was seizing. Her eyes were rolled back, showing the whites, and a line of foam was gathering at the corner of her mouth. Her breathing was a ragged, wet rattle. "Call 911. I shouted, breaking the trance of the onlookers. The gallery erupted into chaos. Investors were pulling out phones, not to call for help, but to record. This was the most interesting thing to happen in the art world all season. "She's having a reaction," Julian yelled, finally dropping to his knees. Trying to control the narrative even as his daughter convulsed. "It's an allergy, she's allergic to shellfish." "We didn't serve shellfish, Julian," I said quietly, leaning in close to check her pulse. It was thready and racing. "This looks neurotoxic." Julian flinched. "Shut up, Ilara, just help her." The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. They were a blur of neon vests and static voices, cutting through the pretension of the gala like a knife. They loaded Serafina onto the stretcher. "Who's riding with her?" the aunt asked. "I will," Eleanor sobbed, clutching her pearls. "No," Julian said sharply, grabbing Eleanor's arm. His grip was bruising. "You need to manage the guests, Eleanor. The press is outside. We can't have a scene. Ilara will go." He looked at me. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. He needed me away from the crowd. He needed to separate the variable from the equation. "I'll go," I said. The ambulance ride was a claustrophobic nightmare of red lights and sirens. I held Seraphine's hand. It was cold and clammy. I looked at her face, the face that had launched 1,000 magazine covers, now twisted in unconscious distress. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited to feel like a monster. I had just poisoned my own sister. I had redirected a weapon meant for me and let it strike an innocent bystander. But as I watched the heart monitor beep out a chaotic rhythm, I didn't feel guilty. I felt calibrated. Serafina wasn't innocent. She was the beneficiary of my erasure. She has spent 22 years drinking the wine pressed from my grapes. Tonight, she just finally tasted the dregs. "Her BP is tanking," the paramedic shouted, pushing a syringe into her fore. "What did she take? Does she use drugs?" I looked at the paramedic. "No drugs," I said clearly. "But my father gave her a special dose right before she fell. You might want to check the toxicology for heavy sedatives. Maybe something used in chemical preservation." The paramedic looked at me, confused. I sat back against the metal wall of the ambulance. I knew exactly what they would find. And I knew that by the time we reached Mount Sinai, the war between me and my parents would have moved from the shadows into the harsh, unforgiving light of the emergency room.
The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the jasmine and expensive perfume of the gallery. I sat on a vinyl chair watching the clock. 11:42 p.m. My parents arrived 10 minutes later. They had cleaned up. Julian's tie was straightened. Eleanor had reapplied her lipstick. They didn't look like grieving parents. They looked like defendants preparing for a cross-examination. Julian marched up to the nurse's station, barking orders about private rooms and specialists. Eleanor sat next to me, leaving exactly 1 seat between us. She didn't ask how Serafina was. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the scuff mark on the linoleum floor, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "You should have drunk it," she whispered. "It was so quiet I almost missed it." "And missed the show?" I replied, my voice flat. "I thought you wanted a memorable evening." Before she could respond, the double doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, looking exhausted and confused. "Dr. Vance." "Family of Serafina Vancroft," Julian spun around. "I'm her father. Is she awake?" "We need to move her to a private facility immediately." "She's in a coma, Mr. Vancroft," Dr. Vance said, cutting him off. "We've stabilized her breathing, but her toxicology screen came back unusual." He looked at his clipboard, then at us. "We found high concentrations of a synthetic sedative. It's not something you buy at a pharmacy. It's a compound usually found in industrial solvents or antique preservation materials. Julian's face went gray. It was the specific shade of a man realizing he had used the wrong weapon. He had used something from his own supply, something he thought would just make me groggy and confused, enough to sign a power of attorney. He didn't account for Seraphine's smaller body weight or the alcohol interaction. She must have inhaled fumes at the studio, Julian said quickly, too quickly. She's an artist. She works with chemicals. It was an accident. Ingested, the doctor corrected. Not inhaled. It was in her stomach. 2 police officers stepped up behind the doctor. They had been standing in the shadows, listening. Mr. Vancroft, the older officer asked. We need to ask you a few questions about the events leading up to the collapse. This is a medical matter, Julian snapped, his arrogance trying to mask his panic. My daughter is an intense artist. She gets exhausted. She fainted. There's no crime here. Pause for a moment. I want to know what you guys think. Did I go too far by letting Serafina take the fall for a trap meant for me? Or was it self-defense? Tell me in the comments. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. It wasn't exhaustion, I said. Julian turned to me, his eyes wide with a warning. Don't do it. Don't you dare. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I have a recording, I told the officer. From the storage room 20 minutes before the toast. Alara, you are distraught. Eleanor cried out, standing up to block me. She's hysterical, officer. She doesn't know what she's saying. I ignored her. I hit play and turned the volume up. The tinny audio cut through the waiting room air. Julian's voice. The trust executes next Tuesday. She know the Rembrandts are fake. Eleanor's voice. She won't know if she's unfit. A medical episode. If she's institutionalized. The power of attorney reverts to us. Julian's voice. The sedative is untraceable. Frame it as stress. The silence that followed was absolute. The doctor looked horrified. The officers looked at Julian, their hands drifting toward their belts. That's taken out of context. Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. We were talking about managing her workload. She's mentally unstable. The glass was meant for me, I said to the officer. My father prepared 2 glasses. He put the sedative in mine. I switched them. You poisoned your sister? The officer asked, looking at me. No, I said coldly. I declined a drink. My sister took it. I simply didn't stop her. You little bitch, Julian hissed, lunging toward me. The officers grabbed him before he took 2 steps. Sir, put your hands behind your back. As they handcuffed the great Julian Vancroft, pushing his face against the hospital wall, he didn't look at the police. He looked at me. And for the first time in my life, he wasn't looking at me like I was invisible. He was looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. You ruined us, he spat. No, father, I said, watching them read him his rights. I just restored the truth. And unlike your paintings, this one is authentic. I had one more patient to attend to. Serafina was awake. She looked small in the hospital bed, stripped of her couture and her confidence. Her skin was the color of old parchment. When I walked in, she flinched, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. You switched the glasses, she rasped, her voice damaged from the seizure. I heard the police. You let me drink it. I didn't make you drink it, I said, pulling a chair close to the bed. I just didn't stop you. There's a difference. Why? Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. Mom and Dad, they love the legacy, I corrected. And they love the money. You and I are just assets. You're the show pony, and I'm the plow horse. But the plow horse was about to become the owner. I opened my bag and pulled out a thick file folder. It wasn't medical records. It was my own research years of spectral analysis, pigment dating, and provenance tracking that I had done in secret in the gallery basement. Next Tuesday, I turn 25, I said. Grandfather's trust unlocks. It gives me 51% of the voting shares in the gallery. Dad knew that if I took control, I'd audit the inventory. I tossed the file onto her bed. It slid against her leg. Open it. Serafina hesitated, then opened the folder with shaking hands. She stared at the photos. They were high-resolution microscopic images of paint layers. What is this? That is the lost Vermeer Dad sold last month for $12 million, I said. Look at the chemical breakdown of the blue pigment. It's synthetic ultramarine. It wasn't invented until 1826. Vermeer died in 1675. Serafina looked up, confusion clouding her eyes. I don't understand. It's a fake, Serafina. They're all fakes. The Rembrandts, the Vermeers, the breathless discoveries Dad makes in Europe. He commissions forgeries in Italy, ages them in the basement, and sells them to investors who trust the Vancroft name. The gallery is a laundering operation. No, she whispered. My art, my exhibitions. Your art was the distraction, I said brutally. Why do you think you got a gallery show at 19? Why do you think every critic gave you glowing reviews? Dad bought them. He needed a shiny, young genius on the front page so no one would look too closely at the old masters in the back room. The realization hit her harder than the poison had. I watched the illusion of her life shatter. She wasn't a prodigy. She was a prop. All the applause, all the awards, all the love she thought she earned, it was just marketing budget. They were going to kill you to keep the secret? She asked, her voice trembling. Incapacitate me, I said. Commit me to a psych ward so I couldn't vote. But yes, they were willing to sacrifice my mind to protect their fraud. And you sacrificed me to expose it, she countered, a flash of her old fire returning. I survived, I said, standing up. For the first time in my life, I chose to survive. And because I did, you know the truth. You're welcome. I walked to the door. The FBI is coming to seize the gallery records in the morning. I'm giving them the keys. The Vancroft name is dead, Serafina. I suggest you start painting something real because the free ride is over. I left her sitting in the wreckage of her identity. I walked out of the hospital into the cool New York night. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The Vancroft Gallery, I said. I have some inventory to correct.
The FBI didn't knock. They used a battering ram on the service entrance I had left unlocked. I stood on the mezzanine level of the Vancroft Gallery at 6 a.m., watching the raid unfold like a piece of performance art. Agents and windbreakers swarmed the floor, pulling masterpieces off the walls with gloved hands, the Vermeer, the Rembrandt, the Turner. They were all bagged, tagged, and carried out as evidence of a billion-dollar wire fraud scheme. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My parents were denied bail. The recording of them discussing my incapacitation was enough for the judge to label them a flight risk. The press had a field day. The art of murder, the headlines screamed. For the first time in their lives, Julian and Eleanor Vancroft were famous not for their taste, but for their toxicity. On Tuesday, I turned 25. I sat in a conference room with the family lawyers men who had looked past me for decades. Now, they wouldn't meet my eyes. I signed the papers. The trust executed. The voting shares transferred. What are your instructions for the gallery, Miss Vancroft? The lead attorney asked, his voice trembling slightly. With the inventory seized and the reputation tarnished. We recommend filing for bankruptcy. I looked at the deed in front of me. No bankruptcy. I'm not dissolving the assets. I'm repurposing them. I went to see Serafina one last time before she left the city. She had been discharged from the hospital and was packing her things at the penthouse. The seizure had left her with a slight tremor in her left hand, her painting hand. Where will you go? I asked from the doorway. She didn't look up. She was folding a silk scarf, her movements slow and jagged. Paris, maybe Rome, somewhere nobody knows the name Vancroft. She paused, then turned to me. You knew they were fakes the whole time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked. Or would you have told Mom and Dad I was just jealous? Serafina opened her mouth, then closed it. We both knew the answer. She would have turned me in to protect her spotlight. I hate you, she whispered. You saved my life, and you ruined it at the same time. I didn't ruin your life, Serafina, I said, turning to leave. I just turned on the lights. You're the one who has to deal with the mess. I walked out of the penthouse. I took the elevator down to the lobby, stripped the Vancroft name off the mailbox with my fingernail, and walked away. The gallery reopened 3 months later. But the gold lettering was gone. The velvet ropes were gone. I renamed it the Restoration. It isn't a showroom for billionaires anymore. It's a school. I hired the best restoration experts from Europe, real ones, not forgers, to teach students how to uncover the truth beneath the paint. We analyze chemistry. We preserve history. We strip away the varnish to find what's real. I kept one painting though, the fake Vermeer my father was so proud of. It hangs in my office, not on the wall, but leaning against the trash can. I slashed the canvas right down the middle. It serves as a reminder. Precision is a weapon. Use it wisely. My parents send me letters from prison. Eleanor begs for money. Julian sends critiques of my management style. I burned them unopened in an iron bucket on the roof, the same roof where they tried to end me. People always told me I was the shadow in this family. They were wrong. I wasn't the shadow. I was the solvent. And now that the grime is stripped away, I can finally see the canvas clearly. It's blank, And it's mine. If you've ever had to destroy the life you are given to build the life you deserve, tell me your story in the comments. And if you believe that truth is the only masterpiece worth owning, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep uncovering the layers together.